Today we're going to talk about art of the Americas before the year 1300. Now this is a vast subject covering several diverse and really sophisticated cultures, so we'll just be able to touch on the highlights here. For this opening slide, I just want you to notice this work of art. It's called a portrait vessel, and it's made out of a ceramic by the Moche people of Peru. They were really sophisticated artisans, especially in the ceramics. The image on the first page of this chapter in the textbook is called The Offering, and it's from an Olmec site at La Venta. Now the Olmec people, they came into prominence about 1500 BC, and they preceded the Maya and the Aztec cultures. What's interesting about this particular vignette is that there are 15 figures that are made of this green stone or jade, which is really quite precious and quite hard to carve. And that one figure in the back is made of more of a sandstone, something that's much softer, much easier to carve, and a very different kind of stone. Now, one other interesting thing about this particular gathering of figures is that it was buried beneath the courtyard of La Venta for millennia, really. But 100 years after it was buried, now it was buried exactly like this, with these figures in this configuration, carefully set up. And about 100 years later, they dug it up. We can tell this because dirt and sand that was above this particular burial fell into the hole, and then they covered it back up. By knowing this, we have insight into other similar figures that were found all around the area of Mexico, of the Olmec time. What are we talking about with geography here? Let's take a look. So here we have a map of the region, and we're going to look specifically where the squares are. You see, we have Mesoamerica, and then we have an area in South America. In addition, we're going to get an overview of the North American Indians. Now, one thing I want to show you on the map that you can see down here is, let's talk for a moment about trade and the precious stone jade. Jade was prized by the peoples of the region because it is about the hardest stone that there is, and you can carve other stones with it. You can take jade dust to polish stones, and also it's got this lustrous beauty. One of the things that they say in the Chinese tradition is that jade is the hardest and the softest stone. So let's look at where the Olmec cultures were, which is right here around Mexico City, and where the jade came from, which is right here in a river region in Guatemala. So that's a distance of about 1,000 miles that they imported the jade that they used for the figures that we were just looking at. So now, back to the beginning. We're going to look a little bit more at the ruin at La Venta. The first ruin that we found, that is one of the earliest ruins, is called San Lorenzo. And that came before La Venta, but here we have La Venta, where those figures were buried, and where they actually found over 102 items made of various stone. They found altars, they found throne kind of things, and they found a couple of these colossal heads that we're going to look at in the next slide. What I would like you to notice here is the pyramid. This is something that really fascinates me, these impulses that humans share across cultures and across oceans. I would like you to please read on page 384, the whole page, the New World, Mesoamerica. So I know you'll be reading the whole chapter, but do pay special attention to this page because it lists a lot of facts about these cultures. What we're looking at here with the pyramid is a mound of earth that was created by the Olmec people that, as I said, that preceded the Mayans and the Aztecs. This particular pyramid remains over 100 feet high, even though it was made about 1,500 years ago. Now, in front of this pyramid, we have the plaza where they buried precious stone. They buried these elaborate kind of tile patterns. And there seems to be some kind of a ritual significance to making these great works of art and then burying them in the earth. With the Olmec people, much of it is guesswork because we really don't know, because they did not write things down. One of the great mysteries to come out of the Olmec time is these ginormous heads, colossal heads. They all pretty much share this look, and this guy's probably a warrior. One of the things that we find with really all of the people of Mesoamerica is that they were rather warlike, and conflict was a part of their daily life. They also seem to believe in the power of blood to actually nourish the earth. And they did this through rituals that we call bloodletting, which is literally pouring one's blood into the earth. And also they did practice human sacrifice. But I'm going ahead of myself. Here we have a gigantic head. This particular head is 7.5 feet tall. But these heads, they range up to 12 feet tall and several tons each. I always wonder, how did they move these things? How did they carve them? How did they get the stone? And ultimately, why did they bury them? At the earliest Olmec site, they found 10 of these huge heads. And interestingly enough, when these heads were buried, they had had their faces defaced. And this was in the years prior to the turn of the millennia. At La Veta, they found 4 of these large heads buried, along with all the other items. So colossal heads, Olmec culture. Let's talk next about the great city of Teotihuacan. Even the name itself, Teotihuacan, came from the Aztecs who worshipped this city, and they believed it played an important part in their origin story. What we see here is an overview of the city of Teotihuacan. Now, this was a culture that thrived from 100 to 650 in our Common Era. Much of what we know about the city comes from later reporting from the Aztecs. But let's just take a look at what did seem to happen here. Apparently it was a holy site. It was a huge city, the largest in the world at the time, and it ultimately housed about 125,000 people. The makeup of the city was very similar to what we see in later Mayan and Aztec cities, in that at the center we have these pyramids, and then the royalty and the important administrative offices are nearest, and then as you get further out from these center complexes, that's where the commoners lived, in these apartment kind of compounds. One of the things that really amazes me about this pyramid is, what is it in the human psyche that makes us want to build pyramids? If you go all the way across the oceans to Egypt, they have what? Pyramids. Built actually quite a bit earlier than these were built, but they have a lot of similar characteristics, and in some way they seemed to fulfill the same function. So in the center of Teotihuacan, we have this large avenue here leading to the Temple of the Moon. Here we have the Temple of the Sun, and the Aztecs named this large thoroughfare the Avenue of the Dead. So here we have a map of the city of Teotihuacan. And I'd like to show you one thing to help to get the scale. Now we have this Avenue of the Dead, and another interesting fact is that the people, they actually dug the course of the San Juan River so it could go across and under the avenue. But what I want to show you is this courtyard right here. You see the size of that? It's called the Cuidadea. And that is a courtyard where 60,000 people could go during a festival. Consider 60,000 people could fit into that area, and that gives you an idea of the scale of all of the other structures. Now, what they may have been looking at is this pyramid here, the pyramid of the feathered serpent. Here we have the pyramid of the feathered serpent. And what we're looking at are earlier layers. What would happen with many of these pyramids? Now, this was originally built in the year 200, but then successive generations would layer on top of the earlier pyramids. Cultures did this throughout Mesoamerica. So often we're seeing only the most recent of the culture's version of the pyramid. So maybe it was a few hundred years later. They would just layer one layer upon the top of the old layer. So when archaeologists dug up, when archaeologists removed the stone, they found this very interesting carving. And this carving shows the typical stylization of the people of Teotihuacan. Now what these are, if you look closely, is they're these sort of fanged serpents. Here's some kind of a fanged serpent, and here's some kind of a warrior guy. We don't really know exactly what they were for, but we believe that it's to represent the storm god or the god of war. So much of the art of the period was about celebrating war, as it was really important to the people. Now, a part of that is bloodletting ritual. Before we talk about this image, let's talk for a moment about how it was made. This was made in a process called fresco. One thing that really interests me about that is that fresco was also used throughout Europe, and it was used in Egypt. What fresco means really literally is painting on wet plaster. So if you can imagine, sheetrock paste. If you've ever put up sheetrock, there's this kind of a paste that you use to smooth it out. So you take sheetrock paste, you add some water to make it a little bit more fluid, and then you add pigment, you add color. And that's what these artists are painting with. Fresco means painting with wet plaster. I suggest you remember that one. So here we have a priest doing a bloodletting ritual. It is from a house of a noble person. Now, some interesting things to look at is the way here we have the blood flowing from his hand, and that tells us that he is actually putting his own blood into the earth. Another important thing is this scroll coming out of his mouth. It's like a comic book sound bubble. So that tells us that he's chanting prayers. Now, if you look closely, you see how big his headdress is, and that tells us that he was a pretty important fella. He was an important priest in the whole scheme of things. As the people of the Teotihuacan kind of faded and their culture lost its supremacy, the Maya culture came into more importance and significance. The Mayans were a very advanced culture. They had the most sophisticated hieroglyphic writing of the area, really of all of Mesoamerica. They also practiced astronomy, they watched the cycles of the plants, and they had a very sophisticated understanding of mathematics. Rituals played a very important part in the life of the Maya people. They had the bloodletting, human sacrifice, and ball games. We're going to look more at ball games as we go through these lectures. And really, when you think about it, and you think about our ball games of today, soccer, football, baseball, it's pretty easy to understand the significance. Perhaps in ancient times, there was more of a political weight on the winning and losing of the ball games. Perhaps sometimes they were fought to the death. We really don't know the specific details, but we do know that they played a very important role in society. Let's look at the city of Tikal. It's really the earliest large Maya city, and it had its population up to 70,000 people. Unlike the city of Teotihuacan, which was built on a grid with flat, straight streets, this city conformed to the rainforest culture, to the rainforest terrain where it was built. I want you to notice the 9 levels of the pyramid to the right. That's called Temple 1 at Tikal. It has 9 levels because it is believed that there are 9 levels to the underworld that we face upon death. To the left, we have the Acropolis, which is where the kings were buried, here at the city of Tikal. One more thing to note is that these raised causeways to the left, you see this sort of raised area. That would have been the road, because during the rainy season, the lower areas would probably have become impassable. I'm going to pause now and move on to part 2 of the slide lecture on the art of the Americas before 1300. Thanks for listening.